We're back here, episode number 3 of the Theory of Living with Kai and Cody. And why is that thing still beeping?
I can turn it off. I mean,
technical difficulties. Timeout.
Yeah, it's all good. It's all good.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, what brings us here today? What are we talking about?
We're going to talk about relationship.
Oh God.
I know the subject is quite broad. We're going to contain it to certain relationships, right?
Romantic relationships?
Not really.
Okay.
Not really.
So we're going broad, and then we'll be more specific down the road.
Right. Exactly.
Okay. So it's a tricky subject to even dive into because it's so complex. As anybody out there listening to this knows, there's so many different forms of relationships, from the friendships you make to the romantic relationships to even, an employer or employee relationship. They can be one of the most beneficial things for you, or they can be probably one of the worst things. Anybody's gone through a breakup or separation from an employer, had a shitty boss, or a bad friend can know of these negatives I'm referring to. But also the other side of that's the good thing. If you have a good friend or good employer or good partner, can add such huge benefit to your life. I mean,
absolutely.
This, for example, we're great friends, we're brothers. So that's the only reason we're in this position right now. But not a lot of people have somebody like that, or they don't have that in every type of relationship in their life. It's usually a mix.
Right. We actually talked about this in depth before, that why romantic relationships actually fall apart more often than friendships, right? Really good friendships, right? And one of the things that we talked about was that in general, romantic relationships require that people often want something in return, right? Remember that? Really good friendships usually don't have that.
Yeah, or if they do, the demand is much less than typically what a romantic relationship entails. I think people usually, when they enter a romantic relationship, it's with depending where you are, a cultural understanding that I give you XYZ, you give me XYZ, and in order to do that exchange, we don't do XYZ. So, a typical thing with the relationships here, culturally speaking, monogamy. So, while we're together, you don't see other people, think about other people, or be involved with other people sexually. Typically is where the line is drawn. Some people draw the line emotionally as well. So, and that usually is only driven with the opposite sex, whereas you could have a good friend like you, and we can have a deep emotional relationship, but because there's no sexual attraction or we're of the opposite sex, it's okay.
Yeah, so none of us actually really advocates in one form of romantic relationship, right?
No. I think there's so many different ways you can find fulfillment, and relationship styles are so varied and unique person to person. Typically, there's an overarching type of relationship based on the culture, again, history and time period where you grew up, but monogamy is the biggest one, and we probably can see that from evolutionary characteristics as to why that's been important, why it's developed. But the cool thing about right now, at least in the U.S. and a lot of more quote-unquote first world countries, is that these relationship styles are being reevaluated. Non-ethical monogamy, ethical non-monogamy. There's a whole bunch. Polyamory. There's so many different forms to maintain relationships. And I think it's going to add value to people's lives because whatever the normal precept and the well-established relationship styles are right now may not be what are best for you or your partner, and unless you're willing to at least explore conceptually, idea-wise, again, like we've talked about, if you don't explore these things, you may be leaving things on the table. Again, not saying it's for everybody, but you should at least take the time to examine them. Because, again, maybe the trade-off is worth it.
True. And, when we talk about this kind of subject, we talk about, historically which form of relationship was more advocated than the others. I mean, there are so many examples. For example, in Sparta, I don't remember exactly. It was I don't remember exact context, but your spouse having sex, especially a woman having sex with another man, wasn't really considered. I guess maybe I shouldn't have started to talk about it because I don't remember exact context of it, but I think it was more open in the time, especially, and that's really interesting because, in Sparta that was the case, but in other cities, in Greek cities, that was not the case, right? So even in the same period of time, there were multiple forms of relationship even back then, right? Thousands of years ago.
Things that were...
So that's really interesting to look at, actually, because we a lot of times we talk about relationship when which form is better than the others. We typically talk about evolutionism and historical, I guess, context to it, right? But I guess if we take that kind of approach, it's kind of hard to get to actual discussion, productive discussion.
Yeah, so you're saying essentially there's been a dominant narrative.
Right.
And monogamy has been at the forefront of that. Yeah, so there's potential where, like you said before, we're just thinking these have been the only relationship styles and patterns, historically speaking. But that's not true once you look into history. That's just the main thing that's shared in current media and current forms of education. So there's been other forms that have been, I think their merits are up for debate and should be looked at and maybe revisited. So, I mean, there's things culturally that are obviously not acceptable today that were acceptable hundreds of years ago. I mean, pedophilia being the biggest one, that was pretty dominant in a lot of Greek culture. Things we obviously want to avoid today. Thankfully culture has shifted against that and away from that, but maybe we've left these other things unexamined that are worth value.
Yeah.
I mean, you had to bring up Sparta. Now I'm all thinking about is 300 and people getting kicked in the chest and ripped dudes. So you've kind of really derailed this conversation.
Right. Did I? Oh, man.
But there's also a lot of people that have found fulfillment without being in these atypical, I guess we're on the topic of romantic relationships currently. I mean, like somebody like Nietzsche, who was rejected even though he was in love with a girl and, was a brilliant man, but still produced a lot of value. And one might argue that suffering, I mean, he suffered a lot in his life from physical illness, but also, the proposal rejection had maybe a huge impact on his work, because you would think all these negatives, you think there would be maybe an air of cynicism in his work, but to the contrary, the guy is super excited and saying, you should go live life, go make the most of it, despite what I think most people would do in those positions is kind of, put their head down, woe is me, the world sucks, the gods have cursed me, nothing is working out in my favor. But he saw it a totally different way. He actually wished difficult and bad things on his friends and loved ones because he believed, this is how you build character. This is how you get more out of life, makes you less soft and can make you more valuable by having these struggles and these burdens. I think one thing that's often not discussed maybe in depth is the difference between relationship and friendships that men share with other men in a sense of camaraderie versus what women share typically with other women. There's not as much as a sisterhood, it seems, with women. I don't know if this is due to like the competitive nature of a partner or oh man, we're getting a little controversial here. Yes. But again, this is my anecdotal experience. I found that on average, the female friends I have typically don't have as close female friendships as they do male friendships.
Right.
Whereas like male friends typically have a lot of male friendships as well.
Well, there's a counter argument to that. I remember,
Let's hear it.
so I think this study I've seen before that women tend to live longer after they lose their spouse than, men do. I mean, dramatically different, right?
Yeah.
So in that case, that the conclusion of the study was that because they can develop friendship with others besides their spouse.
Yeah, no, it's very valuable. I just would wonder if those friendships
It's
are
exactly opposite story to yours.
No. I'm saying women can have a harder time
Right.
developing deep friendships with women on average. So,
On average.
yeah, woman to woman interpersonal relationship rather than
Right.
maybe woman to man. Also, that might shift dramatically later in life where maybe some of these biological imperatives are less prevailing. Because,
Yeah.
I mean, when you're in your 80s, you're probably not as inclined to reproduce or think about things and maybe a sexual tendency.
I think that's a big part. But in that study, though, when they were talking about this friendship, they were talking about friendship with the same sex.
Oh,
actually.
interesting.
Yeah, so that's why, I brought that up.
Yeah, well, that's bullshit. You're just trying to
you,
counter me.
You just pointed out a really important part, though, and they're older, right? So that may play some important role to make that difference.
Yeah, I mean, I think
I'm not saying you're right.
no. That's not how I heard it. I heard I'm right, you're wrong. I'm big, you're small. No, so I think there's something to be said there. I think also though that's why friendship typically, again, this is anecdotal, is my experience. I think on average, it's easier to have a deep friendship with somebody when there's no romantic feelings involved, because sexual drive and the need to reproduce, whether it's evolutionary, cultural pressure, or otherwise, seems to be so powerful that it overrides these things where you can't even develop maybe a deep friendship, or it's hierarchical where that factor is so high, it's more powerful. Whereas when I have a friendship with somebody who I'm not sexually attracted to, so in this case, a man, I don't have to worry about that. I can actually develop a deep relationship based off those other values. My mind's essentially not getting tricked into like, oh, dude, you just got to reproduce. You got to have sex. You got to hook up, And, maybe the culture is a bit involved with that as well. Being seen as like, oh, I need to have a partner. A romantic partner is seen as valuable, or I'm more valuable in society because I have a partner and my partner's attractive, blah, 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 all these other things. But I think friendships are typically undervalued culturally, and romantic relationships are overvalued.
Yeah.
Is it the same in Korea?
I think it's about the same, man. I mean, about the same. Yeah. I don't think there's a huge difference. And that typical stereotype of Asian women, like obedience and things like that, is just not true.
You mean a good woman? No, I'm just kidding. I wasn't serious.
That is just not true. I mean, this is not just from my experience, but that's just a wrong idea, stereotype of Asian women. And almost about everything, I mean, obviously there are some cultural differences, but when it comes to romantic relationship and marriage, there's virtually no difference. For example, this is just a characteristic you can see on the surface, but divorce rate is about the same between Korea and the U.S., and cheating rate is about the same too. Yeah, they're probably top 5 in the world. Actually.
Wait, are you telling me people are reporting honestly about their cheating? Who's the guy handing out these tests? I want to know.
I don't know how they gathered that data, but I'm sure they can get that data from court cases.
Yeah, I'm sure. Infidelity being a case.
Right.
That's an interesting thing you mentioned, because we were actually talking about this earlier. So how relationships are defined is whether they're successful or unsuccessful. I think typically the way somebody sees if a romantic relationship is a successful endeavor is if it persists if that relationship continues. So when you bring up something like the divorce rate, I think it's hard to quantify that as unsuccessful, or maybe we shouldn't, because a relationship, regardless of the outcome, can be a huge benefit and increase your life as far as like quality, and you can come out a better person. And again, the opposite is true. You can come out a more jaded person, worse off, and have a lot of negative things attributed to it. But I oftentimes think our relationships are almost set up to fail because the main goal is not necessarily getting to know somebody and loving them and trying to help each other grow, but it's to make sure that the relationship survives no matter what. And we both know this. We've seen relationships where obviously both these people hate each other. They're just together because they've been together for a long time or something of that nature. And that's hard to see, especially when it's a loved one in that situation, or when you're in that situation, when maybe we should go separate ways. Maybe there's incompatibility. Even though love persists, the incompatibility is greater. So maybe we should exit this engagement with one another for the benefit.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I think, also it's really similar to what you just said, but a lot of times marriage and or relationships fail because there's just incorrect expectation or just wrong definition of what successful relationship is, right? And again, I mean, all those definitions and all those expectations come from society itself, right? I mean, you don't really define that. You don't just wake up one day, I'm going to get married and have a kid. It's already there. It's already there. You just chose to take that path, right?
True. Without a lot of thought beforehand, as if this was the correct path for me. This is the expectation, so why not go forward with it? This is the natural progression of a relationship. You find somebody, you guys like each other. Yeah. Depending on your religious preferences and things of that nature, the next step may be, sexual intercourse, see how you're compatible there or not, or you might wait. Engaged, families meet each other. Do they approve? Okay. Get married. Yeah. Okay, now that we're married, it's been about a year. What are we doing? Kids. That's the next progression, the next step. And I think a lot of people take that step without a deep analysis. And again, it's a byproduct typically of sex, so it's pretty easy to have accidents occur, or we're naturally inclined to want to do that, but it may be at the disservice to the child or the spouse or yourself. There should be some rigid and repeated discussion between both parties before heading down that path. And again, before even heading down the path of a relationship, whether it's boyfriend, girlfriend, or partner, or however you want to define that. And a lot of times we don't have that, because in our mind we think this is what it should look like. I should have a boyfriend, I should have a girlfriend, and it should fall into this tight little neat box that I've seen put on TV, on Instagram, Facebook, on the people I know in my life. And that's what a relationship looks like. That's what a good relationship looks like. But then you don't also see the dirty side, the nitty gritty details of the arguments and the development, and all those finer details.
I think really this aligns with what we talked about last time when we talked about in the previous episode, how people react or behave under the influence of totalitarianism is really similar to that, in which that you haven't really created your own values, right? That's where all the problems occur, because again, you see and hear and about values of certain things, and then that you just automatically or even uncritically accept it as your own values. And as you move forward, you find that everything's a struggle, because you may go fine, right? Progress fine, but a lot of times that's not the case. If you look at like average divorce rate, I mean, there's no such thing as average divorce rate, but let's look at the divorce rate.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty high, right?
Yeah. I believe it's over 50%,
Yeah,
right?
something like that. But why does that happen? Right? I mean, obviously there are a lot of superficial reasons,
Mm-hmm.
incompatibility or kids, whatever. But I think the bigger problem, underlying problem, is that all the expectations and the values you thought of marriage were not true to you,
Mm-hmm.
right? Therefore, you start to lose yourself, right? You start to see a lot of conflicts
Mm-hmm.
for which you don't have any solutions,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
I think that's the fundamental problem of today's marriages and relationships in general.
Yeah. It's not having the discussion
Mm-hmm.
that is potentially ongoing, right? There's some core values that we
Mm-hmm.
tend to hold that relatively are unrockable
Mm-hmm.
outside of drastic life-altering situations, whether
Mm-hmm.
it's death or, something immediate
Mm-hmm.
that you can't ignore. But again, this happens in more than just these romantic relationships we're talking about. This happens in friendships. You'll have a friend. I think everybody's had that friend that takes advantage of them. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
They call you a friend. They say they love you. They do all the things that you think a friend would do as far as verbally communicating to
Mm-hmm.
you. But when it comes to action, they're not there. Maybe they don't show up. Maybe they only need you. Or, sorry, let me rephrase that they're only a friend when they need you, when they need something from you. That's when you hear from them.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, they're reaching out because they need a little bit of money.
Yeah. I mean,
they
you can
need
see
some
that
advice.
pretty easily, right?
Yeah.
When it happens, it's pretty easy to recognize.
Yeah. But sometimes I'd say most of the time, a lot of people let these friendships persist because it's so much easier to just persist than have a conversation and potentially end it. Even though ending it could be the best thing for both parties.
Right.
Because they might be learning, oh man, you know what? If I want a friend, I can't treat them this way.
Mm-hmm.
And you might be learning a little bit of self-love and self-respect, like I deserve to be treated better.
Mm-hmm.
But again, that takes somebody to step outside and say, hey, you know what? What are my values?
Yeah.
What do I want out of life? What do I deserve?
Mm-hmm.
And maybe sometimes that look in the mirror is like, oh, you know what? I'm lacking. I'm shitty. Maybe I need to make up for it. Maybe I'm the bad friend. Maybe I'm the bad person in these relationships.
Yeah.
I've been the bad person. Usually not in friendships, but I
Right.
definitely in a couple of romantic relationships where I was selfish, immature, and ultimately it took losing those things to see like, oh yeah, okay, I've messed up. Like I've headed down a path I didn't realize I was even on until in a moment it felt like I woke up and I'm like, whoa, how did I get here? What happened? And you lose yourself, and that's losing a loved one sucks, but losing yourself, I mean, that feeds to every avenue of your life. So it's something you've got to be diligent about to pay attention.
Mm-hmm.
There's a song lyric from Brand New that I really like that says, sometimes you forget to be the better man, or something along the lines. You forget that you're trying. I'm not the better man. I forgot I was trying. Forgetting to try to be better, because it's easy. It's easy, especially when you get in a heated argument. You just want to be right. You just want to get your point across, even if there's not logical or rational reasons, and you're wrong, but you're like, no, you know what?
Sometimes you just argue for the purpose of arguing,
Yeah.
And
not to say arguing is bad. It can be very productive, but
yeah,
there needs to be
a lot of
lines,
times-
because it can be hurtful.
Yeah. I mean, you talked about being selfish in relationships before. I think it's a human nature, man. I mean, people are, the selfishness is part of human nature, sympathy as well. You talked about sometimes it's just hard to end that relationship because, I mean, you didn't really talk about reasoning, but I think one of the reasons is because of that being sympathetic as a human being. That's part of the nature, along with the selfishness. So sometimes your sympathy weighs more than selfishness, and you just tend to think that, oh, this is gonna get better, or I feel bad about for that person, whatever. And that's how relationship just remain as it is, rather than taking the action to break that relationship or move forward.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's some things that are negotiable, or maybe you have some beliefs that you hold that are malleable.
Yeah.
And those things should be up to malleability, potentially what they are. Again, because it's something cool you get out of a relationship, again, whether it's employer, friendship, or romantic, is that maybe you haven't seen the world through a specific point of view. Maybe you have an idea about the way things should be. Maybe you're the type of person always gets breakfast 8 a.m. and that's how you want it to be. You want coffee at 8 a.m., breakfast and eggs. And a partner, maybe they don't want to eat breakfast, and you realize, well, how is this going to work? I need to have breakfast. He or she doesn't want breakfast. How do I resolve this? And then you're like, you know what? Okay, I'm just going to wait. We'll get something later. And then you find out, oh man, you know what? I kind of like just waiting, putting off the satisfaction. You delay it a bit. You're like, oh, actually, it's not that bad. Like, I have energy. And this is just like one small thing. These can be like spread out to much bigger things, like the way you see the world, or even, taste in music, something you would have never listened to before because you have a negative bias towards or judgment. But your partner likes that music, and you give it a chance. And you're like, oh, you know what? I can see where it's going. I like it. It's not bad. But you have to be open to, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I don't have it all figured out. To give that person a chance. I think a lot of time we come into relationships with this way to edify ourselves. So we bring our ego into it, and when we want the other person essentially to mirror and be us, to basically agree with everything we say. Because if they do, well, I'm right, then my opinion's not wrong. But by being at that disposition from the get-go, you actually never really get to meet that person. You get to meet somebody that's doing their best to not upset you and please you. And it's always awesome when you feel like, oh yeah, the other person thinks the way I do, sees the way I do, because it feeds our ego. It's like, oh shit, maybe I'm not wrong. Maybe I got some things figured out. This person's cool because she thinks I'm cool, But if you do that, and that person's not being genuine because they actually care about you and they want to form something, or you're not being genuine with them about your feelings, then 3 months down the road, eventually you're going to start seeing, oh yeah, they have different ideas, and maybe we're not actually eye to eye and compatible. So it's always good to approach, I think, those relationships slightly cautiously. Try to see who that person is. Let them be themselves, and if you guys hit it off, cool. But if not, there's billions of people in the world,
right?
Potential of other matches, but even being alone is better than being with the wrong person. You can feel more alone with somebody than you can being physically by yourself, I think, when you're with the wrong person.
Yeah. I mean, compatibility is one of the important things for sure. But I think it's almost impossible to find someone who is 100% compatible with you, right? So in that sense, continuous conflicts in which you're trying to find out basically who that person is and how that conflict in values can be resolved, or it cannot be resolved. You will have to try out though. But I think that's almost unavoidable. It's inevitable. You have to go through that at first, right? On the surface, you may think that, oh, we're super compatible, we like to run in the morning together, whatever. But there are so many aspects in a relationship. So, in a way, you should be always ready for that. And I think it's valuable, meaningful conflicts, because only which you can find out who that really person is.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
There's nothing like difficult situations to really see somebody's character. I'd almost argue you don't really know somebody until you've seen them in a very hard situation, whether that's an emotional difficulty or even a physical one. I mean, ideally both. That's why I personally love, taking a potential partner out in the woods, climbing, whatever. Because when you have some physical hardship, those emotional walls seem to come down. It's like, maybe you're a bit of an asshole when you're not like comfortable, And the fact of life is you're going to be uncomfortable a lot, especially with your partner if you're spending all the time together. I think that's something we also fail to realize is that, maybe this relationship works great when we see each other 3 times a week. You know, maybe we don't need to live together to actually get the most out of each other. Maybe there's a sweet spot. My buddy Brendan, he's got a really nice saying that I like. He says, you know, sometimes the secret to a happy ending is knowing when to roll the credits. And I think there's some truth to that, whether that's a relationship ending or deciding like, yeah, we can only see these people in, you know, a specific amount of time or in a specific situation, you know, and maybe that's how we should quantify and define this relationship. Sometimes things get sour because we let them just keep going, you know, to the point where I'm bitter and I resent you, whether it's a friendship or an employer. You're like, you know, throw the finger at your employer because you're sick of it, you feel taken advantage of. But, you know, maybe if on the first week when you start feeling that way, if you just had a conversation with them, then you could know like, oh yeah, it's heading down that road. Or maybe they were realizing they're in the wrong and mistreating you, and they can do steps to fix it. Or you can find some compromise, you know. But again, that takes a lot of looking into yourself and being like, you know, what am I worth? What do I want? Am I getting that out of this person, out of this employer, out of this friend? If the answer is no, you need to try to find out why. And anybody that's level-headed, whether it's an employer, a friendship, or a relationship, you should be able to discuss these ideas and these things, the way you're feeling. And if you can't have a reasonable discussion with them, I mean, do you really want a deep, like, huge part of your life with them? I would argue probably not. So maybe it's back to the drawing board. But at least you got some dignity out of it, you know, and more, you know how to interact in these relationships and kind of navigate the water, so to speak.
Yeah, that's true. Good stuff.
Has there been any relationship where you've compromised on?
Oh yeah, I mean many times, right? But I think even then, I think I learned a lot about myself. You know, about that person too. But I learned more about myself too. You know, so that's what I was saying earlier. That, you know, through all these conflicts, you really get to I mean, I didn't say this earlier, but you get to really challenge your values, and which is to basically reevaluate your values, right? So, you know, you obviously you have to be really open to that idea. Otherwise, you're going to just, you know, you're never going to even think about to whether or not that idea is correct or value should be there, you know. So the reason I'm hesitating is that I don't want to really talk about, you know,
we don't have to talk about specific individuals. Maybe just something like generally speaking, in the sense of maybe with what you do with your free time. Have you ever been in a situation where you can't do what you love to do or what you're really passionate about? Dude. And then how did you handle that?
I don't know. I don't remember exactly, but, you know, a lot of times it's just you know, you give up.
Well, you heard it here first. You give up,
right?
But it wasn't giving up, because obviously you went through, you know, multiple events and discussions with you know, certain individuals. But you came to the realization maybe it was best to go separate ways.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's added value to your life. I think both of us, I mean, we both, I mean, we've known each other for a long time.
Right.
We've gained, I think, a lot by exiting certain things. I mean, we can even speak about our employers, right? So just the industry in general we were in, we were, you know, dissatisfied. Yeah. But it took us sitting down, and again, you know, this was over 7 years. 2014 is when we first started talking about this podcast, to make the decision to head somewhere. So yeah, sometimes it takes a long time to actually exit something, because you have to prepare, and again, you feel doubtful, inconstant, unsure of yourself. But through honest communication and, I mean, working together, we kind of saw there was a pattern, right? You know, there was something that continually showed up in the data, was dissatisfaction with this job and specific things with this job, more than even our managers, our coworkers. There was something underlying in there that didn't align with our core values or what we wanted out of life. So eventually we made the choice to leave altogether, and it takes I hate that. Oh, it takes courage. Because it doesn't take courage. I mean, it takes effort, sure, but we can at least say undoubtedly right now where we're at that we did the bare minimum. We're trying to make things better. And I think that shows through in our daily lives. We find generally more life satisfaction and just a gratefulness, I think, for even the chance to try something different, try something new that you can get when you break up with people. You can get when you leave employers. You can get when you end friendships. But you can also get this when you just have a discussion with your employer. Maybe they give you a raise. Maybe they change your position. You know, maybe you get the value you feel like you deserve. Or in a romantic relationship, maybe they see where you're coming from. They adjust their behavior. Or you're able to compromise in some way to get more fulfillment. Maybe you have a deeper relationship because of it.
Yeah.
You know, same thing with friendships. I think it's easier to do in friendships, again, because there's already that kind of barrier to entry. It's like, if we don't like each other as is, there's not much for us to gain, so why even maintain a relationship? But when you do go into those in-depth conversations, you know, a friendship becomes more than just a friendship. You can get what we have, you know?
Yeah.
Like a brotherhood, something that's just deeper.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't have that in their life, and that's
true.
Unfortunate because it's just such great value. Adds such a
absolutely
level of enjoyment and fulfillment.
Yeah, and then the difficulty in ending a relationship in general, whatever the relationship is because it's it's easier to stay in your comfort zone, and even though your relationship may not be ideal, but it's more comfortable. You feel comfortable to stay in that status of a relationship, right? So typically we have to hit the worst status of the relationship to actually even think about, okay, maybe I should end this, right?
Yeah.
But I think that's also part of our nature that one part is that it's easier to stay in the relationship even if it's not ideal, and second, we always have that hope that this is going to get better, right? But that's like really blind to the severity of the situation. Like, no, it's not going to get better if you actually make changes, right? And then one of the changes you have to make, I mean, I'm not saying to some people there who are struggling in their relationship, just end it right now.
No, you heard it here first. You need to end that crap.
If you're really desiring something more than what you have currently, I mean, the start should be the end of your current relationship, right? Otherwise, you cannot make, of course, assuming that you have tried everything. I mean, I think that's another important thing. I mean, I think, this is personal opinion, if your relationship is not great, I think you should try everything you can at first, right, before you end it. Because even if you end up breaking the relationship, you will learn a lot of things along the way. Yeah. Right?
Yeah. I mean, at least you have no regrets. Looking back, you say,
exactly.
You know what?
That's another part, right?
Exhausted all potential.
I hate that feeling. Yeah, I hate that feeling.
Mm-hmm. I'd say that's one of the worst things, to look back and be like, dang it, maybe if I tried a little harder, spoke my mind, my piece a little more, maybe then the love would have sufficed and sustained, and the relationship could have continued. Yeah. And a lot of times, maybe that's us deceiving ourselves, because people that are in abusive relationships probably feel that way too. But again, that's why you got to take a step back and really look at it, look at the actions and the words, and they lined up. Do they line up with your values? And again, this is actually interesting, because we haven't even talked about the most important relationship. It's your relationship with yourself.
Yeah, that's true.
That's something we skip over all the time. And you can't have as good of relationships with others if you don't have a good relationship internally with yourself, because we're wrestling with concepts all the time. We're bombarded with information, with feelings, emotions, all these chemical processes, and if we never take the time to understand them repeatedly, then we might just be being taken over. Our systems might be hijacked by emotion rather than intentionality and making choices for ourselves and what we want out of our lives. So identifying value. And again, it's very hard to do that when you're young. I think it just takes time to build these things, and they change more and more over time. But some things, again, like I was mentioning before, are going to remain there. Like these data points are going to show up continually. And I would say these are kind of your core values, that you can always come back to. Those seem to shift less over time, but you need the historical data to show like, oh yeah, on average, this is the kind of person I am, or, I'm more inclined to this way maybe. So, and those can be negative things. So maybe, I'm inclined to be mean, or I'm inclined to be reactionary. So how do I tone that down? Whether it's meditation or other things, how can I do this to have more control over myself and a better relationship with myself? So then I can interface with my employer, my partner, my friend in a way that adds value to their life.
Right. Yeah, I think, we were really frustrated with this discussion about panpsychism, right? But whether or not, I'm going to just borrow that idea a little bit, whether or not the consciousness is ubiquitous and fundamental part of this universe and yourself, right? It'll be tragic to think that you are just nothing but a collection of ideas, and storage of memories, right? That's how I think it is.
Yeah.
In that sense, you should really painfully learn about yourself, right? I think that's where you start actually to find out what your values are, right?
Yeah. I love that phrasing, painfully learn about yourself.
Yeah, it takes a long time,
pain.
right?
It's pain, though. That's, there's no denial. There's a pain attached to learning. Learning is suffering to some degree because it's difficult. It's difficult. You can't. The process of acquiring something you didn't have before is a difficult journey, and rightfully so, because it may not be as valuable if it didn't have difficulty attached to it and associated with it. And again, we live in a culture and a time, place, and I think it's just evolutionary to avoid pain because we think pain is associated with death. And again, maybe that's some like physiological evolutionary mechanism that has helped us at some point in our history, but doesn't serve a much practical use today. Like we've gone to the gym many times, it hurts. It hurts when you're pulling weight, you're pushing it, your muscles feel a pain, but there's a growth associated with it, going through that pain. And so you tell your mind, you steady it and say, hey, no, this is a good pain. Even though it sucks, it's going to pass, eventually over time, there will be growth. And a relationship is like that too, whether it's self-evaluation.
And about yourself too, right?
Yeah. That relationship with yourself, again, going back to that, it's a painful journey because ideally it's lifelong,
Yeah.
And you're always learning about yourself and discovering more things that you didn't think you'd always have. Going to the panpsychism part with, if you think we're a collection of ideas and, just elements and can be boiled down to mathematical equations, where's the humanity element, even if that is the case, and that's like base reality and all that's true, consciousness is the base level, and we're just, basically that magnified at this point. We still interface with reality. We still feel as if we have free will, even if it is an illusion. We're here right now. I'm choosing my words. So there's power in that. Even if it is illusionary, we should take advantage of it.
Yeah.
We should manipulate it.
Yeah, even if that's the case, the journey itself is real. At least to you, the journey is real. Right? Yeah. So I think that's I was going kind of backwards. So how do you have a good relationship with, whatever that means? You have to know what your core values are. Then you can actually determine whether or not this relationship is meaningful to you. And how do you find that? Well, you just said it, right? You have to know about yourself. It's not just that, I'm happy because of this. That could be your value, but highly unlikely, right? I mean, your core values don't just come. Some may come. I cannot really determine how those are discovered, but a lot of them you have to actually search for it. You have to go through a lot of different, parts of your life, whether that is reading, whether that is learning from, someone, mentor, whether that is traveling. There are a lot of these things that you can do to actually at least evaluate by yourself and to discover your core values, right?
Absolutely. I think
that's where your happiness comes from too.
Oh, sure. I think happiness is tied to those things.
Satisfaction, at least.
Yeah, life satisfaction. It's funny. I think what you're getting at as well is that, in this kind of paradoxical way, when you're searching, you're also creating. There's like a creation of value via searching. And oftentimes we think of, these phrases like, I just got to find myself. You're not going to stumble just one day and trip over something and be like, I have discovered what I want and desire out of life. It's an active process of searching and then trying on new things like, oh yeah, does that work for me? No, it doesn't. Does this fit with me? Does it feel right? And again, I hate using things like feel because they don't necessarily describe something that's maybe repeatable and like very scientific or, empirical data like that. But there's a very real process of creation via discovery and searching. It's funny, we're like 46 minutes into this and I think we've only mentioned the word maybe love a handful of times. We're talking about relationships and we haven't touched on the concept of love. And that's a super loaded term we'll have to get into another time.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I think everything we've discussed is absolutely just one small part of love and shouldn't be overlooked when you're considering what you love, who you love, and things of that nature.
Yeah. Since we talked about mainly romantic relationships, do you want to talk about the movie that we watched?
The Marriage
night?
Story?
Yeah, it was a really great movie.
Yeah, it had Adam Driver, I believe is the guy name.
And then Scarlett Johansson.
Yeah, it was the
good. Movie started really interestingly in a way that the beginning of the movie is basically beginning of the end of their relationship, right? So the movie starts in a room where those couples are sitting together with a mediator who's helping for their separation. So they're about to, they were supposed to read what they had written about their spouses, positive things. And Scarlett Johansson's character refuses to read it, right? And Adam Driver is like, well, I'm okay reading mine. Well, I'm okay. And then she's like, well, I don't want to listen to yours either.
Yeah.
And that's how the movie starts.
Yeah, it was very well done. And I mean, no spoiler alert, they get divorced.
Right.
But again, it's the journey that makes the movie so interesting, and it's very relatable. I felt like it displayed a process like that in a very enduring way that doesn't miss the difficulty involved. And like you were mentioning earlier, it wasn't that the relationship lacked love, even though they went their separate ways. You could still see love between them, but it was ultimately the incompatibility.
I think that was
history.
That is sort of the moral of the story that I talked about this before. One, your intimacy doesn't just disappear, right? It's still there, and you can see that from a lot of scenes in the movie throughout. Also, another thing is that maybe marriage doesn't fail because the intimacy is just not there anymore. The love is still there.
Yeah.
But sometimes you just you have to take that route.
Yeah.
I think that's there were like the two main parts of the movie.
Kind of the themes, right?
And then the reason I think they starts with that they're meeting with mediator is that one, there's so much happening I mean, there's just so much to happen, just for that separation process. They didn't have to really. I really like that part of the movie that they didn't really have to show the couple's happy times, even though they could.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
I think that was to emphasize that there's just so much, after that, I mean, throughout that separation process.
Yeah.
Right. I think that was like his way of emphasizing that.
Yeah. There's intentionality there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that tone with the director's direction. Ironically, I guess not ironically, but like you mentioned when we were discussing it earlier, that it seemed like intentional. They didn't show the backstory because then you're not left at a bias about, wait, whose side am I on? Which character do I prefer? You see the heaviness through their actions going through that process, but you also see both sides. You see the love and kind of like, yeah, I understand you're not blameless. Like both characters were detestable in some of the ways they carried themselves in their actions. And that's how relationships are. Even when they end, things are seldomly one-sided outside of abusive relationships and things of that nature. Typically both parties are at fault, but both parties also loved each other deeply.
Right. And then, also it shows that both parties may not see their marriage equally, right? I mean, the female character, she was so unhappy in the relationship, but Adam Driver's character was so blind to that situation. He didn't even know why it's happening, basically, right?
Yeah.
In that intense conflict toward the end of the movie, he says, "You were happy until you decided not to." Right? Because that's how we thought, but completely different from what she was feeling in the relationship, right? So that was really interesting too, that a lot of times, which is also true, we see the quality of or status of relationships so differently.
Yeah.
Right?
I think that boils down to, at least in that situation, a lot of situations that people have is ineffective communication. The way he viewed the world in his relationship was entirely different in his head than the way she viewed it in her head. And then also reality, the way the third person, like us, viewed it was completely different. We had a different interpretation of the relationships, which is why it's so important to immediately discuss things. Not to say, like, when you're slighted, you should immediately be like, let's sit down and talk. I felt like I was wrong.
Yeah.
There is some like personal responsibility and like handling emotions and certain things that are on you as a person that you should do, and that should be based on the relationship you have initially with yourself and self-love. But a lot of the times, those things in that could have been avoided had they had communications early on.
Right.
But this is the beautiful thing too. Despite all that, it's not for nothing at the end, right? Even when a relationship ends, you can gain so much via hindsight, via going back and looking at it and analyzing it. But again, if you don't like take that time to process and analyze and try to understand and make sense of it, you're probably going to repeat the same things in your future relationships, or you'll hold a very pessimistic cynicism towards relationships, maybe the opposite sex, and maybe these things, and you might limit yourself unknowingly just because you weren't able to visit it. So it's also why it's a good skill to develop is analysis of yourself and others. It's okay to cry, man. It's okay. Just let it out.
Yeah. And then about the intimacy in the movie, it looked like almost that the intimacy is there not necessarily for the hope of restoring the relationship, but like there's a limit to which they can inflict damage to each other, right? I mean, that was the big part at the end.
Yeah.
Remember when Nora was telling the lawyer, the female character's lawyer was telling her that, oh, you got 65 to 45, 35 in custody, and she's like, no, I don't want that. I want 50-50.
Yeah.
She doesn't want that.
Yeah.
Toward the end.
Yeah, it was interesting because both the lawyers were.
That's a big part of the movie too. I think that's
Yeah,
it
was going to show, I think, how culture and most people project their experience on the way relationships end. In this case, a divorce, they're saying like, she's going to come after your money, your kids, everything. So you got to be ready to go. And he's like, no, I know her. She's not like that. And then the other lawyer is doing the same thing. And they're influencing both these like individuals that really do love each other to commit pretty atrocious things against one another because they're afraid. They want to defend themselves. They want to, obviously they care about the kid a lot. Yeah. But because they're so influenced by these other people, which in our situations would be, potentially the media, podcasts like this, for example, can influence you in a direction you thought you weren't going to head. Yeah. Again, why you have to really examine it, and if you don't, there's going to be a lot of damage done. They hurt each other, even though they could understand where they were coming from by the end of the movie. At that point, the damage is done. They're walking their separate ways. Even though that love exists, you could see what potentially could have been. This could have potentially been avoided.
To me, that part was really interesting because, if you think about relationship that is falling apart, what is most necessary is revision to the relationship, right? You have to find a problem and, make changes for that problem. But really, in comparison to that, really interesting to me was that those lawyers going through a divorce, they're forcing this, revision to their past, right? Not for restoring the relationship, but just to change the narrative so that they can get benefits out of it, right? Yeah. So that, comparison was really interesting to me, how they put together, Yeah.
I think we do that when we exit relationships a lot of the time. This is something we've talked about, but this is definitely why we have the Patreon-only podcast. This section right here is not going to be in the free podcast. But when we've talked about, it seems a lot of the time when we meet, women on dates, that they always have an ex that was abusive. That term can be applied. And it seems to be applied all the time. And not to say these situations don't happen, but what constitutes abuse, right, I think can be heavily impacted when you're looking back on something. If you have a negative disposition towards it and things ended poorly, or maybe, you have internal issues of self-love and hatred, it's easier to paint somebody as the villain when potentially maybe there was fault on both parties there. Maybe
that's totally possible.
Yeah. And I think this happens to both people. This happens to, I know dudes too. Is, she was a bitch, she was a blah, blah, blah. And, she was just a person and you were just a person. And now that's ended, you still harbor very hateful feelings. And again, I'm not dismissing people that have gone through real abuse. I'm just saying on average, it seems like we have an issue of we want to remember our partners previously or employees, whatever, friendships as these awful people to remove the responsibility from ourselves, absolve ourselves.
I think people do that, basically creating a new narrative that is advantageous for them. Yeah. I think partially because I think a big part of it is that way, they get hurt the least. I think that's why people do it, not necessarily to portray that person as. I don't even know that person. I don't care. Right?
Yeah. Why would you?
It's for them, right? For themselves. Yeah. I think they do that so that, that way they don't look bad, maybe on the surface. Also, internally, they can justify the situation. They don't get hurt. It's not hurtful. Yeah. Because that was that person's fault.
Yeah. No, absolutely. So I think there's just a danger there if we don't, revisit those things in a more humble way, where maybe there was some fault I had. I've been at fault for relationships ending. So I'm saying, well, that's funny. I've had heartbreak. I've had suffering. This dude's laughing. You see this? You guys remember this one? You're paying for this.
No. It's because so true. I've been there too. Yeah. So I understand. Yeah. I think all of us have been there.
No, I think so too. Yeah. Anybody that's gone through something has probably been there.
Yeah. So, if you claim that you've never done anything wrong in your relationship, you're a fucking liar.
Oh no, that's Jesus over there.
Yeah.
It wasn't a relationship, I guess, right? You know. I mean, well.
Yeah.
I guess we're an hour in now. Wow, we just hit an hour. This one's gone by really quick.
Yeah.
But this is a part 1 in a infinite part of series.
Yeah.
There'll be more conversations on relationships and the
for sure.
dynamics with guests and other people that can speak.
Yeah. Romantic relationship. We really wanted to talk about mentorship.
We did.
Or like special relationship that you create with persons outside of your family or close friends, because those relationships can be really unique and special.
Oh yeah, I mean, I would argue in my personal experience, those ones have sustained and lasted longer than the romantic ones, and have had just as intense moments.
Oh yeah, because it's not, nothing's given and guaranteed.
Yeah. So
or you take it as guaranteed.
No, absolutely. So I guess next time, right?
Yeah, we'll talk about that for sure. It'll be very interesting. I'm sure you have you've had a great mentor before. Yeah. AKA Kai. I don't know.
Yeah, 10 years older than me again. That's the only reason he could be a mentor.
Before special relationships. So
no,
we'll
absolutely.
definitely talk about that next time. But yeah, I think that's it for this episode.
All right.
Yep.
Thanks for tuning in again.
Bye, guys. That's this week's episode of the Theory of the Living podcast. Thank you for listening with us. We're Cody and Kai. Don't forget to join us next week for another episode.
And if you'd like to help support us, we have a Patreon page where you can subscribe for exclusive content.
Also, please share it with others who you think may find value in our discussion.
Leave a rating, a review, and please subscribe to the podcast and the YouTube.
Thank you again.
See you later.